is rely pretty heavily on Q&A. And yeah, I'm fine with people just sort of, when the time is right, speaking up. You can also feel free to put them in the chat. That's fine too. Although Ashley, can you help moderate? Can you help me keep track of what questions from the chat?
Totally. Yeah, I will keep track and yeah, make sure we get to everyone.
Cool. So what I'd love to do, I start all of my coaching sessions this way. I'd love to start with a short centering exercise, if that's all right with everyone. So I have this bowl. So I'll just very lightly guide. This will take maybe 2 or so minutes. We'll just all get centered. So I invite you, if you'd like, you can close your eyes. And just take a few breaths in a way that feels really good. Maybe noticing your feet on the ground, how the ground is meeting your feet. Also how your weight is supported by whatever you're sitting on. That weight goes through what you're sitting on to the floor and then rebounds up through your spine. So noticing if awareness of that changes your breathing at all. Yeah, we'll just take a couple more breaths here and then I'll ring the bell. And when I ring the bell, we'll wait for the sound to fully subside. And then you can gently come back when you're ready. Take as much time as you need. Thank you, everyone. So, hi. Yeah, so I'm Josh. I call myself a holistic personal development coach. Yeah, thanks, Nadia. I totally, yeah, I agree. It's the way I like to start everything. So, holistic personal development coach. It's kind of a mouthful, but I find that it's the closest thing that I can, the closest phrase that I've come up with that describes it. So I'm going to get to what that means, but I think what I'd like to do first is just share a little bit about my story and who I am and how it is that I've come to do what I do and why I care about it so much. So I was born in Houston, raised by very nice Jewish parents in a small part of Houston called Bel Air. Ended up going to Princeton and let's see, Princeton was wonderful and also in certain ways very challenging. And when I when I graduated, I moved back home to Houston, and I felt that I had gone through what seemed to be this kind of like big dump circle where I moved back home. I was tutoring the SATs, and I was like a high school physics teacher for a year. And um, when you graduate Princeton, they say things like, "Well, the world is your oyster, and you can do anything you want." And here I was tutoring the same standardized test that I thought was stupid and didn't really believe in. And um, I went through a pretty big philosophical journey. I had a real existential moment. I was 23, and yeah, so the word authenticity became really important to me at that time. And what I realized was that I had been living most of my life up to that point, jumping through the hoops that society had put in front of me. So, you know, sort of like winning the society game, like going to a place like Princeton, getting a great education, um, chasing things like awards and prestige and building my resume and all those kinds of things. Um, and then one day, I went to a Lady Gaga concert, and by myself. And at the time, she like just worn the meat dress. Remember the meat dress that she wore? That was like super controversial. And I was just like, I was amazed by this woman because I couldn't understand how a person could have the balls to do that. Like, just the courage to actually um, sort of make a stand, sort of even build an entire artistic persona around authenticity, and just doing sort of whatever she wanted. So I was fascinated by her, and I went to this concert, and then and it was amazing. And then in the second act, she dismissed all of her dancers and stuff, and she played the song "Born This Way" on a piano just by herself. And by the way, she's an incredible musician. So she played the song, and um, I had at that moment what I would call kind of like my first real awakening. So it hit me at such a deep level. The song is an anthem for authenticity, if you haven't heard it before. And it hit me at such a deep level that I wept. And the weight of all of my endeavors that I had done for other people, for winning validation, for um, chasing prestige and success and status and all those kinds of things. The the emptiness of all of that kind of came crashing down on me in a moment, and it was very, very powerful. And um, so so that was the moment I decided that I was going to become a piano player. I didn't know how to play the piano at the time, but I'd been a singer my whole life, and so I went home and told my mom, "Mom, I'm becoming a piano player," and she was like, "Okay, honey, that sounds great. Um, Go ahead." But that's what I did. So then I got a teacher and auditioned for a company called Howl at the Moon, which is a dueling piano bar. It's like a chain. Maybe some of you guys have gone to one of their locations. And they gave me a list of like 25 songs, and I had to learn them in order to play a shift. And then it took me 6 months. And then basically I had this. So yeah, long story short, I ended up having a career as a dueling piano player. And it was the first thing that I really did for me, for myself. And along the way, I discovered this thing called the Enneagram, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So just of the people who are on video, raise your hand if you have heard of the Enneagram. Yeah. Okay, cool. If you know your type, by the way, I'd love for you to just put it in the chat, or if you have an inkling of what your type might be. So I took a workshop on the Enneagram. I was working for Howl at the Moon. I'd become a manager for the first time. I was feeling like, pretty smug because I had basically just taught myself piano, gotten a job at a piano bar, and was like, oh wow, I'm like super fucking cool. And people think I'm really cool because I'm like, I'm this like courageous piano player who like, decided to abandon his Princeton education to go like work at a bar. And it was very interesting because that whole pattern that I had thought that I abandoned in order to play piano, meaning the whole chasing validation thing, kind of snuck back in through the back door for me, where I had developed this self-image as this person who was getting validation for being this like cool sort of rebellious person. And and also, you know, people were generally impressed by the fact that I learned piano so fast. And then here I was in St. Louis, working for the same company. Um, After like 2.5 years of getting, um, well, so yeah, after 2.5 years of making this my career, I was like the entertainment director. So I was like the band leader of this band. And then I took an Enneagram class based on a recommendation from a friend. So the Enneagram, for those of you who don't know what that is a personality typology. So most people have heard of things like the Myers-Briggs or DISC or the Big Five. Um, and I was like, oh, cool, yeah, personality typology. That sounds really interesting. That'll make me a better manager because I'll learn about personality types, and I'll be able to interact with people in a more um, effective way to be able to get them to do sort of what I want them to do as a manager. So I took the class, and it was a weekend seminar. It was like 3 days long. And what I really didn't expect was that it would completely change my life and um, basically provide a framework for understanding the entire struggle of that I had experienced internally. So what I learned was that in the Enneagram, there are 9 personality types, and each type can be described in terms of its basic fear and basic desire. What I learned was that I personally am a type 3, and the basic fear of type 3 is that we're worthless, and the basic desire is to feel valuable. So type 3 is find themselves unconsciously orienting to what is valued in my environment, and how can I become that? How can I become the most successful, outstanding, admired, um, loved person here? And so threes are attracted to um, careers that put them in the spotlight of some kind, or where they can make lots of money, or be successful in some way or another. So when I learned that I was a type 3 and I read the chapter in the book on the Enneagram, it was so eye-opening, because, and also very embarrassing, because I realized that, I mean, it was just like a cold read from a few paragraphs in a book it was so precise at a soul level that I couldn't believe it. And so what I realized was that my whole journey and this move towards authenticity was characteristic of type 3s. And I basically realized that this is what I want to devote my life to, is I want to help people understand their inner workings so that they can wake up to their own patterns and see the ways in which they've been living unconsciously, and move towards a deeper way of being, where what they're motivated by is not the unconscious egoic activity that has been driving them for their whole lives, like it had driven me, but to be more awake and aware. And what I found is that there's some really cool benefits to doing that. Practically speaking, in addition to its, the path of doing this kind of inner work is what invites a greater sense of meaning and depth and capacity for love and vulnerability and all those kinds of things. It also has profound practical applications in terms of leadership and teamwork and the way that you show up in your relationships. It's kind of the ultimate competence that is transferable across domains of life. So the Enneagram is a big framework that I use in my coaching, and I use other tools as well to help people contact that more and more of their own depth that they may have not experienced before. And let's see what else I want to say about this. Yeah, so this phrase, holistic personal development coach, is really about this sensibility that I have just been describing. And by the way, I read through the South Park Commons website, and it is super fucking cool. You guys are like, I'm really impressed with what is going on over there. All the language around discovering your life's work, what it is that only you can bring to the world. This is something that I really care about too. So I feel in a deep way that my life's work is to bring more awareness to this kind of sensibility, and to help people contact, as I've been saying, more of their own depth and the meaning that can drive their work as opposed to some of this more unconscious ego activity. So maybe I'll pause there and kind of open the floor. I'm really curious. There's a lot of things that I could talk about. I could talk about the Enneagram. I could talk about a number of the tools that I've used, and other kind of modalities that I've experienced personally in my own journey that I bring to my clients that really help with this kind of work. Um, yeah, there's a number of things that could happen here. So I'm kind of open to what wants to emerge from this. So maybe I'd love to just field a couple of questions. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas after everything I just said? Yeah, Marek. Merrick?
Yeah. Thanks, Josh, for talking to us.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, in terms of the people that you work with,
Hmm.
when they approach you, what do they say that they're struggling with? Kind of what does the typical journey look like for them as they work with you over a period of time? And then basically, like, what do you see as your primary role in that journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, yeah, so broadly speaking, people have come to me for a number of reasons, but one of the themes that I see a lot is, um, okay, so I've gotten a lot of clients through this community called On Deck, which some of you guys may be familiar with. So one of the things that's really interesting about the clients that have come to me through that work is that a lot of them are in an incubation or brainstorming phase for what their next project is going to be. They're looking for a co-founder. A lot of them have have like successfully exited their first company and are looking for what their next big project is. Um, and they have some inkling that they want support with getting clarity about what it is that their next project wants to be. And um, one of the things that keeps showing up is, first of all, so many of them are threes, Enneagram threes. Um, and one of the challenges of being an Enneagram 3, which I have a sort of intimate familiarity with, is that if up until this point of my life, I've been um, just doing that thing that I think will make me successful, and I haven't considered questions like, what do I really want and what am I devoted to? Then all of a sudden I'm 29 years old, I've sold my first company, and I'm standing on a mountain of cash and have, all this free time, and I'm kind of wondering what my life is for. And I'm kind of looking back at my life and saying, I'm not really sure that I meant any of that. I'm not really sure if it was like me doing it. And so, really, what I experienced my role to be is helping people to discover first and foremost who they really are in that context. And then I'm a really big fan of a guy named Parker Palmer. So Parker Palmer, if you don't know who he is, he's worth looking at. Um, he he spent 10 years in a Quaker community, and then after that built an organization called the Center for Courage and Renewal. And what he does is he leads these workshops that help people listen to the voice of their inner teacher. And he's all about creating a soul safe environment in which that exploration can happen. And so one of the ways that I experience my own work is seeing the person, a person's real, who they really are through whatever they're presenting, and then kind of like reaching in and like sort of gently holding it, and then saying, I'm seeing this. This is what I think. And this is really interesting. One of the things that's come about is, as I've done this more and more, is that people find that, oh yeah, this actually is me. This piece of like courage that I had abandoned. So yeah. So that's maybe sort of abstract. And then what my work practically is then I help people design practices in their life that will help them contact that inner teacher in a more sustained, constant way, so that they can anchor to it, as opposed to being somewhat like seaweed in the tides of whatever their lives were before. So practices really depend. This is my work is very custom. So, some people come to me and they have a hard time speaking up in meetings, for instance, or really identifying what it is that they want to say in the first place. And so, for instance, for a person like that, I might assign go take a martial arts class, or meditation is always great. I recommend meditation pretty frequently, but there's a kind of this is something I really like about my work, is that I think there's a real kind of art and science to crafting the perfect practice for a person. So yeah, and I'm not afraid to get weird. Like recently I signed someone who has been sort of in the same vein that we were talking about, but there's this kind of like mutedness in her life. She's not experiencing any vividness. And so for her, practice is once a day at lunch, please find a speaker that can blast music very loudly and dance to at least one song. So this kind of thing. And you can imagine, so the language of the brain is experience itself. When we're on a personal work journey, a lot of times, particularly in the West, and there's, our orientation is, let me go read a book on this topic, or let me go speak to an expert. And that's really useful. It's useful to have insights at the level of the mind, but transformation really happens in the body, in the heart. So these practices that I assign are for constantly getting in touch with this new way of being that then a person is sort of trying to embody forth. So does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, maybe let's keep this Q&A thing going. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
You briefly mentioned meditation. I was curious to dig in a little more there in what role meditation had in like your personal life and then in your teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I'm noticing right now actually is, as you asked that question, and I just took that breath, that thing that I'm doing of like pausing to think about a response, or like to sense what actually wants to emerge, that's a thing that emerged from meditating. And I love it. I love that. I love that. It's because previously, being sort of Enneagram 3, it's like you asked me a question on meditation, and the second you're finished speaking, I'm like, oh yeah, meditation's amazing. It's so great. I've read these books, and here's the cool thing about it, and this is what it's done for me. But there's a whole different energetic presence that I'm not capable of bringing because of the long-term effect that it's had. So that's one of the ways that it's impacted me. There's a tremendous amount of research on what meditation does for the brain. Let's see. Here's something that's interesting. I'll share this because I think it's important. So when I first started meditating, I absolutely hated it. It felt like dying every day for 20 minutes. And I was working with a coach at the time, and I was like, yeah, it literally feels like death. And he goes, yeah. Every day for 20 minutes, you get to die. And then with that death falls away a lot of the extraneous shit that had been in your head. And then you get to be reborn in a more authentic way. So that's one thing that I've found to be true in my own experience. But I kicked and screamed for a long time before the practice settled in. Another thing that's interesting, just from a neuroscience perspective, there's a book called Being a Brainwise Therapist that I really recommend it. It is for coaches and therapists who are attempting to understand how the brain works and what happens to the brain as a person develops, and then what can happen to the brain in terms of rewiring because of therapy. But it's just there's a great introductory few chapters on what happens in the brain as a result of things like meditation, also as a result of things like empathic attunement, when you're really attuned to by another person. So without getting super academic, the spark notes are your brain has neural nets that are somewhat calcified and cut off from the rest of your brain. And there's this thing called implicit memory. So implicit memory is different from explicit memory in the sense that implicit memory is what is embedded into you based on the quality of your environment, basically from like 0 to 1.5 years old. You don't have sensory or visual memories. You can't recall what happened to you in that time, but it massively shapes who you are. And then as you go through the world, things that you unconsciously hold to be absolute truths are often the result of these implicit memories. For instance, like in the book, she talks about one time, her door was open and someone else's patient came to the water fountain and said something like, well, you just have to protect yourself at all costs. That's how the world is. It's like, oh, right. So that's the result of an implicit memory shaping a person's entire belief system. And you can imagine, if that's your belief system, how that person is in the world. Certainly is informing them in a deep way. And so implicit memory is calcified in these isolated neural networks sort of around the amygdala. And then what meditation does, so here's your brain. So here's your brain stem. And then here's your limbic system, which is like amygdala and sort of the emotional brain. And then here's your neocortex that wraps around it. And there's something very special about, so here's the two halves. And then there's something very special about this part of the brain right here, which is that when it wraps around, it's the part of the brain that is in contact with all three sort of sections. So there's physical contact here. This is the orbitofrontal neocortex or something like that. Anyway, so this part of the brain is responsible for creating more integration among all the parts of the brain. And so when you're meditating, there are brain scans showing that this is the area of the brain that is beginning to light up, and it is decalcifying those neural networks that were isolated before and connecting them to greater parts of the brain. So you have more resources when you're being triggered. So for instance, if I'm a person, I'll take myself as an example. So, so like I went on a date last night, and there was a moment where it was like, I noticed myself getting triggered because there was like, I thought she liked me, and then I didn't think she liked me, and then I thought she liked me, and then maybe she didn't. And so that, my ego is sensitive to that messaging. And so, as the trigger happens, like she looks away in some way that makes me think she doesn't like me. As a result of having meditated and done all this inner work, it's much easier for me to stay steady and not to be kind of taken off course or to enter some kind of like very difficult to re-emerge from emotional reaction. So, yeah.
Maybe a quick follow-up. What style of meditation did you find like most useful for yourself and then for your clients?
That's a good question. Okay, so there's so many styles of meditation. It is really wild if you've ever done a deep dive. Asterisk. I just did a course that's really cool called the 45 Days to Awakening. It's by this guy named Jeffrey Martin, who's he's a Western academic who's the first person who's really done a full-on survey of enlightened beings in the world. And he has assembled basically like the greatest hits list of practices, of like meditation styles and practices, and he crams them into 45 days. So you do like it's like a sampler platter of 10 different styles. And I did it. By the way, it's great. If you want to do it, it's really, really amazing. Cool. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so it's super rigorous. You have to meditate an hour a day, and there's all this like surveys and stuff because it's part of the research project. But for me, what I found, well, actually, here's something fascinating about his research is that it turns out that if a meditation style isn't working for you within the first 2 weeks of really trying it, if you're really sincere about the practice and you're doing it for a certain amount of time every day and all that stuff, if it's not working for you, it probably will continue not to work for you for even if you do it for like every day for 2 years. So one of the things that emerged from his research is that people who grow up in a particular spiritual tradition who have a very dogmatic approach to this is the way you meditate are sometimes kind of screwed because it's a mismatch. And some minor tweak could potentially really help. So what I found for me is that there's a gone style meditation where, so I'm sitting and then as I'm breathing, when I notice a thought, the second I notice that the thought is over or that it has passed, I mentally note to myself, gone. And that's been wonderful. I also have a very close friend who did the course with me, and he hated that one, so it didn't work for him at all. So it's really it's a matching game.
Cool, thank you. I actually ran across that course yesterday, so.
Oh, cool.
This is
Oh,
a
that's
sign
interesting.
that the world's telling me something.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I recommend it. It's cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
What's like, except for meditation, what's something everyone can start doing today to start working towards finding? I love how you do that, like finding what is the real you. Is there like something, if you're like not ready to commit, like start really going deep, like, you know, for example, coaching with you, like, is there something simple one at least can start doing, some habit, practice, anything you would advise?
Yeah. So let me just understand the question. You're asking if you're not ready to, for instance, commit to having like a coach, is there something you can start doing in your life that will help cultivate? Is there something specific that you're looking to be cultivating, or is it more just in this general direction?
I think you articulated well, and I'm not even going to try and repeat it, but what you said in the beginning around like you're this person and you're just feeling that there's something that is not quite right with respect to my understanding of whom I really am.
Yeah. Gosh. So if I had to pick just one thing, just one to just throw out there as a thing that is probably universally useful, it would be meditation.
Right.
Something else that I find to be universally useful is stream of consciousness journaling. That's particularly useful, I would say, and Gustav, I don't know you that well, but so for people who draw a blank when they are asked the question, what do you really want?
Yeah.
And find that their nervous system is just so automatically attuned to noticing what other people want and then providing that. The stream of consciousness journaling is a way to sort of like sort of plunge the pipes. You know, it's like you kind of just like, it's amazing. Shit will emerge, you know, it will come out. But there's a big sort of patience and discipline component to beginning a journaling practice, particularly if that's the way that you are. Meditation, this is what's so fascinating to me, is that and this is why I love being able to get to know a person before I recommend a practice, because so just take as an example. So let's talk about Enneagram for a second. So Enneagram types. So we've talked about the 3 a little bit. 3s are doing types. As you can imagine, if they're seeking to become that most admired and inspiring successful thing, then they're pretty active. They're going after their dreams, or what they at least have convinced themselves that are their dreams. And so take an opposite type, like a 9. So as a 9, I'm not really necessarily after being the most admired and successful and polished and wonderful, most loved person. What I'm after is being internally at peace. And so a lot of 9s, similar to 3s, have this sort of self-forgetting thing that happens, but 9s are doing it from a different place and for a different reason, and it shows up differently. They often bring a very grounded, beautiful kind of presence that everyone can just land, and they're super chill. There's no fanfare. There's a kind of decency and humility in the presence. And a lot of 9s just love meditating, because it's just like, oh yeah, I can just like hang out here, la la la, and it's wonderful. But it's not actually as useful. Sometimes it is, but it depends on the 9 and what they're going through. But sometimes a practice that is more activating is more useful for them. So like, for instance, a 9 that I worked with once, I assigned at least once a week going to a track and doing sprints, where it's like you're in a short amount of time, you're activating your greatest capacity for energetic output. And that ended up being really impactful for that person, because their whole nervous system is about tamping their energy down so they can remain at peace. So yeah, I think you're getting the essence, sort of 80-20, like essence of what I'm saying is, so it really depends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I ask a super weird follow-up question?
Yeah.
It may sound so obvious, but I just love to hear your thoughts. But
Sure.
like, what are your thoughts on exercise? And is that something you like, physical exercise? Like, and it's like, I guess you think it's good, but yeah, I just love to hear your perspective on it. And what do you do yourself, for example?
So exercise is amazing. Yeah. So exercise can have a similar effect to that meditation thing I was describing. It's a way of resourcing yourself internally, so that let's see, actually, okay, here's something interesting. So in the coaching program I did, which I loved, it's called New Ventures West. I don't know if anybody here is interested in becoming a coach. Fantastic. Like, really can't imagine a better program. So in the first class, everyone signed up, and there was like a really big application process, and then we're all like excited to learn how to be a coach and what books they're going to have us read and what content they're going to give. And they say, all right, cool. So here's everyone's homework for the year. First, you have to meditate 30 minutes a day. Second, you have to exercise. If you're exercising, if you're like lifting weights, it has to be at least 3 times a week, or yoga 4 to 6 times a week, or some kind of cardio. And let's see, there were a number of other things like that. It was quite a lot. And so our course instructor, James, basically said, this is so great. He was like, well, I don't know what you thought this was, but this is what we have determined is baseline necessary for you to cultivate the kind of energetic way of being that allows you to be able to do this work. So exercise is it's a huge part of stabilizing your own nervous system so that you can be present with whatever it is that you're doing. Whether you're a coach and you're being present with other people and by your own presence helping stabilize others, or if you're a leader or a founder or a team facilitator or something like that, so yeah, exercise it's really important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Right.
I have another question if nobody else
Uh-huh.
has something in. I was curious, to what degree do you see a responsibility to help people understand what they should be doing versus helping them to do it? So for example, you mentioned earlier a person that was struggling to speak up in a meeting. And of course, there can be a lot of psychological, underpinnings behind that, maybe going all the way to childhood. But I'm curious to any like skills. You mentioned like meditation, dancing, exercise, like sprinting. Obviously, these things people already know how to do. But when it comes to helping people develop skills, I'm curious, to what degree is it your job to just send them somewhere to do it, or actually working with them one-on-one to cultivate and develop a skill?
When you say skill, do you have an example of what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
like speaking up for themselves, telling their own story better, advocating for themselves.
Right.
Is that something you help them with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm pausing to, so there's a couple answers. If I think that there is a program they can do or someone else they can see that is like a very specific skill set that can help them, then I do a lot of referring out. So I like breath. I have a few friends that are breath workers, like very amazing breathwork facilitators. Focusing with a capital F is another therapeutic technique that I've recently become fascinated and obsessed with. And so I send people to my teacher a lot. And there are other programs that I've learned. So as an example for that one, the speaking up in meetings thing, there's a book called Leadership Embodiment by Wendy Palmer, who's a Aikido instructor, and she teaches leadership skills using Aikido. So you go to her workshop. This is so great. So you go to her workshop and she has you do something like, all right, so you're with a sparring partner and you sense something in you that you know to be true. And then your sparring partner takes their hands and then you're both standing up. Your sparring partner takes their hands, places them on yours, and then tries to push them down. And you speak this thing that you know to be true as you move into them, sort of pushing them back. So there's a few things that I think is amazing about that. First of all, so as an example, that's a workshop that I might send someone to as a coach, like, you should go check this out. What I also just love about that is that it's a body practice, and it's kind of, this is something that I find really fascinating, is that most in the West, we're so out of touch with the body that when we talk about what the intelligence of the body, or what can you stand to gain from getting in touch with the body, we sort of don't even know what the hell we're talking about. Like, what is it? Anyway, but leadership embodiment and what Wendy Palmer is doing is really cool, because it is a fundamentally body practice that allows you to sort of experience what it's like to assert yourself through the body, which is it's a body experience. So kind of meandering my way back to your question. So I think the essence of your question is, how much do I view it as my responsibility to sort of be there supporting someone as they're practicing versus like outsourcing to like something else?
Right.
Yeah. So that is a huge part of what I do. A huge part of the value I think of what I bring is a sense of accountability. It's just the sense of like, I've assigned you a practice, or we've co-created a practice, and we both agree that it's really great for you. You're excited to do it, and then we have a time on the calendar a week later, and that's just in your head, and you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to have to report either I did or I didn't. So that alone is really helpful. In addition to that, what I find is, this is like this happens all the time. Is like, you know, I meet someone, they're like super excited. They're like, oh my God, this is gonna be so cool. Thank you so much for these practices. Really excited to do it. And then a week goes by and they haven't done it at all. And then that ends up, generally speaking, in, you know, moving into a conversation about, all right, cool. So not the sort of like, you know, you better, generally speaking, I find that not to be very helpful. What I find to be more helpful in the long term is that turns into a conversation about what is it that you're really committed to, and what's the deeper why behind why you would choose to commit to a practice. And there is an element of, this is the thing, is there's an element of faith that a person has to generally be on board with when they commit to a practice, because generally speaking, you don't see the benefits until they accumulate over a while. So you're sort of waking up and meditating for 20 minutes a day, and you don't, and it's kind of like, this is boring, and it feels like death. And then 6 weeks later, you're like, oh my God, I'm a much calmer person. But it happens very gradually. So
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, my question is, I guess, elementary because I'm new to the coaching practice.
sure.
Like, how many sessions do people usually do with you? Like, how long do they stay engaged?
Yeah. So normally I work with people either on a package basis, where it's like we have 12 sessions over generally some amount of time. And I've started moving more and more towards doing like a monthly retainer kind of thing, where it's like we meet 3 or 4 times a month. It's X dollars, and call me anytime. Sessions are usually 75 minutes, which I love, by the way. 75 minutes generally tends to be, I found that to be a sweet spot for me, because what I found, this is, you know, people are sneaky, is that if it's 60 minutes, they'll squeeze it in between 2 other things that they have to do during the day. And they show up not quite where they want to be. So 75 minutes, it's just that annoying extra 15 minutes that it's like, well, I can't, anyway. So it's just great, because either it's starting on like, you know, a little after they're done with something, and also there's a little more time after the meeting that they can reflect before generally they've scheduled something else in a half hour. So it's my sneaky little trick. Yeah, Zach.
That's a good trick in general.
It
for
is.
anyone, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I love the idea of coaching in general. I am super convinced that, you know, everyone would be a much better person if they had access to continue a lifelong coaching. It seems like the biggest shame in my mind is that it's very hard to get a good coach to everyone, because like they're rare and presumably expensive, right? And like even in my personal life, I think I would benefit from a coach, but it's hard for me to be like, okay, I'm going to put in like a meaningful amount of money to this thing, etc. And obviously, like most people in this community are well above the average in terms of like ability to pay for that type of thing. So I'm just curious, like, if you have thoughts about like access to coaching, and are there ways that we can make coaching become more of a widespread phenomenon due to that just like fundamental economic issue?
So that's an amazing question. I really appreciate you bringing it up. I think about it a lot. So you know, coaches come in all kinds of different price ranges, and you know, some are better, some are worse. There's a whole variety of, and also coaching is a little bit of the Wild West too, where it's like, you know, a person can call themselves a coach and be focused on fitness or diet or spreadsheets or like basketball, but they're all coaches. Let me try to really give a thoughtful answer to that. So one of the things that I do is I volunteer with this organization called the Enneagram Prison Project. They teach the Enneagram to people in prison, and they facilitate these like really profound transformations for people, and it's really cool. And one of the things that they do is if a person has gone through one of their programs on the inside, then when they start reconnecting with society on the outside, then they try to provide that person with a volunteer coach. So, you know, coaches who want to do that kind of volunteer work, that's one thing, because there's those people, there's no way they can afford even a, I mean, they're trying to, yeah, they're barely making rent. So accessibility is a big thing. But I think, you know, it's, I kind of don't know the answer to this question truly. I mean, it's a big question for me, because I feel that the benefits of coaching are so powerful. It is a one-to-one or one-to-few phenomenon. I don't believe that it can effectively be automated in an app. You can't be coached by an app, because the human-to-human connection element is so foundational. And so yeah, you have a pool of coaches who want to charge a certain amount, and then that makes them only accessible to a certain kind of population. So I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for your honest answer. I spent a while thinking about that some time ago, and you know, obviously didn't come to any better ideas myself. It just seems very unfortunate that we have access to something that seems like it can make life better, but isn't scalable to, you know, beyond the top percent.
Yeah, scalability this is one of the fundamental, I think, gifts and curses of a thing like coaching, which is it's fundamentally interpersonal, and you can't scale a person. You can't, well, you can scale ideas, and you can scale courses and stuff like that and make courses available, but one-to-one contact, which is so essential for the kind of healing work that a lot of people are using coaches for, that's not scalable.
Yeah.
Unless you just have a bunch more coaches and then their prices come down, or they do a lot more volunteer work. Or maybe, I don't know, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, talking to you guys, this is the brain trust that potentially could solve this problem. So maybe I'm not thinking creatively enough. I am willing to stay for, I know we're coming up against time here. I wanted to just mention, so I'm willing to stick around for a bit. I have some time for more Q&A, but I wanted to mention that the Enneagram is just like so great. And it's one of those, I think that it's widely misunderstood. It's sort of like, it falls into the bucket of other personality typologies. And it's like, oh yeah, I can just like learn the Enneagram and then sort of understand how to communicate more effectively with people. But it really is about this like deepening work. That's the whole point of the Enneagram. And if it's being applied in a different way, then it's, in my opinion, it's being misapplied. I wanted to throw out, if anybody's interested in learning more about the Enneagram, then I would love to do like a follow-up workshop with anybody, even if it's like 3 people on this call who wants to do it. I could do like a kind of an intro workshop or something to just specifically focus on the Enneagram and what it, kind of go through the types. I chose not to do it today because it's really hard to crunch the Enneagram into 60 minutes. I sort of kind of won't do it. Oh, cool, Nadia. Okay.
I'm in.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Josh, why don't I talk to you about that offline, and we can get you scheduled for that.
Cool. So yeah, I know we're coming up on time. It's almost 3 my time. Yeah, so I know that people are going to start trickling off. Let's see. Yeah, maybe I'll send. How can I give you my contact information? I'm happy to be a resource for anybody who's. A lot of people ask questions like, "What should I be looking for in a coach?" Or you know, kind of the question, Gustav, that you asked, like, what can I do if I don't have a coach, or if I don't want to shell out the money for one? I would love to be a resource for you guys on that. So I'm happy to even jump on a quick call or like have a quick email exchange if that's useful to you. Thanks, Osama. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, Josh, could you leave your email in the chat box?
Yeah, totally. Here.
And then I'll make sure it's in like Slack for if people want to contact you later. Thanks.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, I think maybe I'll just end on one final thought here, which is so much of just a really fundamental distinction that I have in my head when I think about coaching and the work that I do is horizontal versus vertical development. Thanks, Gustav. Let's see. Yeah, horizontal, I just mean like getting better at hard skills like spreadsheets and, for instance, how to set an agenda for a meeting and those kinds of things. But the vertical development is this deepening work, getting in touch with, you know, the treasures of your personhood, like your authenticity, your vulnerability, what you're devoted to, those kinds of things. And I just feel that it's, you know, for people who are smart and excited to be contributing meaningful things to the world, then this is some of the most important work that you can do for yourself and for the world. So thank you guys for coming to this. And thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for your questions.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much.
Josh, and thank you to Andrew Lynn for
Yes,
introducing
and thank you,
us,
Andrew.
setting it up and everything. Hey, Andrew.
Cool.
Great. I'll follow up with you, Josh, and hopefully we can get that intro to the Enneagram session booked. But
Cool.
until then, bye guys.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.